All right, we're continuing our look around the country at all the Canadian NHL teams and what they're about to do as we head into the NHL draft. Here's Ryan Rishaug, our longtime Edmonton bureau chief and good friend. What is the area that Ken Holland is most likely going to address as we head into the draft next week, Ryan?
Jay, am I in the big TV right now?
Oh, yeah.
Am I in the big TV on set?
You're in the big monitor,
right
buddy.
Now?
You did it.
Love the big monitor. Yeah, it's honestly, it's my favorite appearance is on the big monitor. So if you're an Oiler fan, you're knowing that they need to do a bit better job defending if you want to get over the hump. You know that as an Oiler fan. So what can you practically do right now? Oiler fans not going to love the answer, Jay, because the answer is not a ton. They are so capped out. So capped out. And we'll talk about Kailer Yamamoto in a minute here. They need to find some breathing room on the salary cap. And if they don't, there's really not much they can do. There's talk about a top 4 D-man, right? We heard Pesci's name. You know, there's people out there. They don't have the space to do it. I really believe that the Oilers they'll look into all of those things. At the end of the day, the fallback position is going to be bring back most of the defense that you had and roll with that from the start of the season. I think, Jay, this is about keeping this team together, not necessarily making a bunch of additions, because the math just doesn't work.
So, you know, the names, as you mentioned, you alluded to, there are names out there. Erik Karlsson, Noah Hanifin on our trade bait board. You mentioned Brett Pesce. You know, even with moving pieces around, we're going to talk about some of those potential pieces in a moment. You have a hard time believing that Ken Holland's going to be able to pull off something of that magnitude.
Yeah, I really do, because the numbers just don't work, right? So you talk about Pesce. Well, a couple of things on that front. It's going to be asset cost, right? You got to make the trade to bring in the asset.
Yep.
And then you got to figure out if there's an extension that's doable. And what does that number look like? I mean, look what Severson just signed for. So how do the Oilers possibly fit that in? I don't, unless they make significant moves. It would have to be like domino. Like 3 or 4 dominoes have to fall for them to add a top 4 blue liner, say. You'd have to trade CC. You'd have to make a bunch of moves. I think there's no question that the Oiler blue line, when they get, to the playoffs, could use an upgrade in their top 4. No question. But it would seem to me that given how difficult it is to do right now, they can make a much more precise move at the trade deadline. Right. Think about how precise that move was for Matthias Ekholm. It was exactly what they needed. It fit exactly what their team required. Well, how do you figure that out right now, Jay? Why not wait if you think your team is good enough? And remember how good this team was. They were one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league from February on. So return the group and then make that precise move closer to the trade deadline. That makes sense to me.
Okay, I'm going to get to Warren Foegele in a second. I do have to ask you very quickly about Evan Bouchard, who is a restricted free agent.
Yes.
You know, what do you think the team is thinking with Bouchard, Ryan? Are they thinking bridge? I know they probably love to go longer, but as you mentioned, with the cap issues, maybe they just can't do it right now.
Numbers aren't going to work on a long-term deal. There's no way. I mean, if you're Evan Bouchard's camp, and you're looking at the finish that he had, looking at the numbers he has the potential to put up over the next 4 or 5 years in that position on that power play, that's not starting with a 5. Maybe starting with a 6. I don't even know. They don't have that kind of space. So I believe the answer here is a bridge deal. The question is, what does that start with? I'm sure the Oilers would love if it started with a 3. Make a case it should be in the 4s. It's going to be tight even to figure out where the money is for that bridge deal. I believe it'll be a bridge deal.
You talked about, the only way anything happens is if dominoes move, and Warren Foegele is a player whose name has circulated somewhat simply because he really did have a terrific playoff, Ryan, and he's only 27 years old, and he's a year away from being an unrestricted free agent. Do you think that may be a move? And I know they wouldn't want to move Warren Foegele, but do you think something like that might have to happen to squeeze a little space here?
For sure it does. I mean, their third line could conceivably be Ryan McLeod, who needs a new deal, but won't be too expensive, Warren Foegele, and Kailer Yamamoto. That conceivably could be a pretty decent third line. But on this team, that's too expensive a third line, flat out. They're not going to be able to do that. So that's why you mentioned Foegele as a potential trade chip. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've heard a lot of talk about Kailer Yamamoto. I think they're trying to trade him. I think Ken Holland has been extremely active, just burning the phones up here over the last little bit, and he will continue to be. But if they can't find a trade for Kyler Yamamoto, I think it's probably headed towards a buyout next week. So there's a couple of players that allow you to free up some space. But again, Stuart Skinner's getting a raise. Evan Bouchard needs a raise. Ryan McLeod needs a raise. Think about when Ken Holland arrived in Edmonton. I think the cap's gone up like $1 million or $1.5 million bucks in the time that he's been here. He's just trying to keep the band together, I think, Jay.
Yeah, that's fair. Meanwhile, speaking of Ken Holland, in the front office, everyone wants to know about Steve Staios. Suddenly, Ryan, Steve Staios is the hottest potential GM candidate out there. He is currently the special advisor to the Oilers operations staff. Ken Holland said he's going to see out the remainder of his contract, so that's one more year. And I know a lot of us saw Staios as a potential heir apparent, but now he's been linked to that new regime in Ottawa. Any update on that situation involving Steve Staios, Ryan?
Yeah, an interesting thing, like what timeline can the Andlauer Group start putting people in place in the organization if they want to make changes, right? That timeline, it feels a little bit sketchy right now. We're not sure exactly how that's going to play out. So, I think that Steve Staios is going to continue the job that he's doing with the Edmonton Oilers. They're going to prepare for the draft. I think the Oilers are working on a succession plan. They are, to Ken Holland, right? Being in his final season as general manager. I think they've interviewed external candidates. I think they have some really good internal candidates. I think the way this will play out is if there is an offer that comes from the Andlauer Group to Steve Staios. I think whenever that happens, I think there's a discussion that happens between the Oilers and Steve Staios. At that point, they determine, is there something they can do that makes sense to keep him on board and forego any potential opportunity. But right now, it's a little bit too early. So I think the Oilers are figuring out what their succession plan looks like. That gives them a sense of where Steve Staios fits into that group. And if they determine through that process that Staios is potentially the guy, then they know what they're working with if and when Staios comes to them. So moving parts, definitely a concern, though, the idea that they would lose him.
Good to be Steve Staios, I'll say that. Let's look into the future, buddy.
Good
Leon
position.
Draisaitl, 2 years remaining on his deal. So a year away from a potential extension. You cover him throughout the season. You could see the disappointment in his face last year at the end of the postseason. But at the same time, you also, you love the way he speaks about this team and how much he loves the players on this team. I love how he always said that we're not just a two-player team. You get the sense that he would be willing to talk extension with this team after a pretty successful season coming up?
Yeah, I mean, that's the, 11, 12, $14 million question. I don't know what the number, like, pick a number, right? I don't know. I mean, you look at where his season was at and, where he should come in. But bottom line, can they keep both those guys at dollar figures like that, right? And it's going to be a tricky needle to thread because you've got Draisaitl happening one year, you got McDavid happening the other, and one absolutely has to do with the other when it comes to these contracts, right? Whether one wants to stay has to do with whether the other one is going to, I'm sure. They've called each other their ride or dies. So this is going to be really tricky. And I think if you listen to the way those guys talked after this season, the pride that Connor McDavid talked about what they've built here, and they've built that together, the two of them. I really do think they want to see it through here. But, hey, man, business is business. And if you think about the dollar figure Leon Draisaitl's making right now, like, what's he underpaid a season right now, Jay? $3.5 million a season? Is he underpaid right now for what he's giving them? And that's for the last 2 years and probably the next two. So if Leon Draisaitl wants to chase the money and go somewhere where the max is just a no-brainer or close to it, you could probably understand that, right? I'm not sure where his head is at. I know he really wants to get this done while he's here.
The cap is going up. It cannot go up quickly enough for this Edmonton Oilers team, that is for sure. Ryan Rishaug.
Or enough overall.
Or
can't go high enough either. Like, it literally can't go high enough.
Where's
90,
Alan?
100, 105, maybe.
Where's Alan Walsh when you need him? Just no cap whatsoever. Ryan Rishaug, you're the best. Thanks for chatting with us. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Cheers, pal.